The information shared in this podcast and related media is intended to provide broad consumer understanding and knowledge of healthcare topics as they pertain to remote work. All content herein is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Further, this information should not be used in place of a visit, call, consultation, or advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. The owners of this content do not recommend the self-management of health problems. Should you have any healthcare-related questions, please call or see your physician or other healthcare provider promptly. You should never disregard medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have seen or heard on this podcast or read in related media. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor, seek professional help, or call 911 immediately.
Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast Mental Health Series. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. The purpose of this series is to destigmatize the mental health issues commonly found in the remote work community. We have partnered with doctors, therapists, counselors, and other mental health professionals for a series of in-depth discussions on a broad range of topics, ranging from isolation and depression to crafting meaningful relationships with others, and maybe more importantly, with ourselves. Our guest experts will share their insights in order to arm teams and leaders with the tools they need to thrive now and in the future. Mental health has always been a relevant issue for remote workers, freelancers, and distributed teams. But in today's climate, the subject is becoming more and more pertinent each and every day. I look forward to sharing this valuable information with you, and please join the conversation online, on the socials, or wherever the audience most suited to hear it can get involved. Before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by TeamMadeApart.com. Team Made Apart features articles, tools, and resources designed to teach remote workers and those who hire them how to work better together. A community for owners, managers, leaders, freelancers, contractors, and all variety of remote worker, Team Made Apart is also a terrific resource for companies interested in implementing remote work policies in otherwise co-located environments, or for those planning to build fully distributed organizations from the jump. Listeners of this podcast have an exciting opportunity to get involved in the remote work revolution. In light of current events related to the coronavirus pandemic and a sudden worldwide shift to remote work, we're offering a free remote work best practices guide for leaders who find themselves struggling to create a remote work policy in a pinch. Now, and for the duration of the crisis, visit teammadeapart.com/crisis to not only download your free Team Made Apart Remote Policy Primer, how to write remote work policies that don't suck, but to find other tools and resources to help you weather the storm. Great working relationships make for great remote work experiences, and with this free guide, you'll be better equipped to do your part in creating and maintaining a happy and sustainable remote life. Once again, to take advantage of this collection of useful resources, please visit teammadeapart.com/crisis, that is teammadeapart.com/crisis, to download your free Best Practices Guide. Today's special guest is Dr. Ronaye Calvert-Conley. Ronaye is the Executive Director of Live Treatment, a concierge one-on-one mental health treatment program based in Los Angeles, California. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology and has had extensive experience working in the addiction recovery field, disordered eating programs, and the LGBTQ+ community. She has a deep understanding of how personal issues or beliefs may motivate or hinder us and approaches each unique struggle with keen sensitivity and insight. Dr. Calvert-Conley's personal philosophy is not to help clients see what's wrong with them, rather to help them acknowledge and embrace what's right with them, while creating a plan for their personal success. Here to discuss staying connected when working apart, technology's role, for good or for bad, in our inter and intra-personal relationships, setting boundaries to avoid burnout, and so much more, please join me in welcoming my guest, Dr. Ronaye Calvert-Conley. Hey Ronaye, how are you? Welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
So glad to be here, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We had the pleasure of having a little pre-recorded call prior to our get-together here, so I feel like I know you, like we're old buddies, and so I'm really anxious to share the story and let people hear what you're up to. So maybe we start there. Let's talk a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what it is you do.
Awesome. Okay. Who I am, my goodness. Who I am is a clinician who finds myself as of several years ago kind of branching out of the confines of an office due to what I found to be changing times even as of a decade ago. I began as a therapist with trauma, as a trauma specialist as my focus, which led me to eating disorder clinics, substance abuse clinics for sure, and, just psychiatric dual diagnosis in general. I love that we say dual diagnosis, by the way. There really isn't a single diagnosis that I've ever heard of that doesn't have some sort of a dual property to it. But since we throw that word around so much, basically meaning that there's a mood disorder accompanied by something else. So a mood disorder accompanied by substance abuse, or a mood disorder accompanied by an eating disorder, some way in which that mood disorder manifests itself, is basically dual diagnosis. So I found my way much over a decade ago in this world where I was quickly promoted to clinical director and then executive director of some pretty prominently known facilities across the nation. And I was very, very proud, and still am, of the work that we did there. It was back in the days of insurance being wonderful, and 30, 60, 90 days of treatment and beyond were not a question. It was the minimum that was provided to people. Nevertheless, while being very proud of mostly the work that my clients put in there and the legitimacy of the work that we did, I always found myself really in a conundrum when they went to discharge. And to the best of our ability, what we knew, even with the best resources available, we would place people in a living situation and in a step-down program, whether it be outpatient or what we call partial hospitalization programming. And it just wasn't enough to continue the level of work that they had going on. So around that time, about 5 years after starting my career in that way, I really started to look at this loophole as a major problem standing in the way of people's long-term recovery. And oftentimes when I use the word recovery, people may think I mean sobriety. There are many people who are sober and who I would not consider recovered, and that may be a whole new podcast. But the whole idea is, recovery is a living, breathing process, right? So mental health and treatment is a living, breathing process. And that really caused me to develop live treatment. There are several facets of that. There's a young adult program of live treatment. There's live treatment in general, which deals with the adult population. And what that really does is it acts as a gap, as a stopgap rather, between what we were able to offer in inpatient treatment and what clients often face in the outside world. If you think of yourself as a client for a moment, you think of yourself within the confines of a community that you've built, that your clinician by name, the clients around you by name, everybody down to the housekeeper and the chef. All of a sudden you're ripped away from all of that, and you're back to quote unquote real life as you know it. And that real life as you know it does not have any space for you already carved out in it. So we're asking you to carve out a space of your own, really kind of fresh out of these gates of treatment that held you and helped you deal with some pretty deep stuff. And live treatment was really developed out of that idea. How do we continue to hold and contain and follow these cases? And of course, new cases that were referred that, had come from other treatment centers where, the standard model of, doing, so just so everyone understands who's listening, the outpatient model as well as the partial hospitalization model exists out of someone living on their own or in a sober living. And the partial hospitalization level can exist with offering treatment up to 4 to 5 hours a day, 3 days a week, sometimes more if you're lucky. Outpatient is about 2 to 3 hours, 3 times a week. So if you imagine yourself in a residential program where essentially your entire day is planned out for you from beginning to end, you're left with a heck of a lot of time on your hands to try to fill with purpose, to try to fill with what your life looks like now. And so Live was really developed as the kind of glue to try to hold all of that together and to try to say, hey, treatment isn't something that happens in a bubble. It's not something that happens inside the confines of walls. It's something that happens as you do live life. It's a living, breathing thing. And it continues alongside you on this journey where we expect you to continue to evolve as people.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really cool observation, actually, that, you know, and that you had the wherewithal to sort of notice that in the system and try to find a solution for it. You know, obviously we live in a time with technology and all these things that maybe help is more available now than it's ever been. But I still think we're trying to step over some sort of the stigma of the past in terms of getting the help that we need. And then, you know, I imagine, and, you know, I don't have a lot of experience in this field, but, you know, as you step out of this facility where you are taken care of and sort of everything's planned for you, I mean, the world probably looks pretty scary. And I would imagine there's a high percentage of sort of relapse or people falling back because they're not maybe capable of getting set up. So I think that this is great.
Yeah, there's kind of a loophole built in, and not to sound overly pessimistic about my field, but, you know, at the top down level, you know, when you don't set people up for long-term success, you kind of have to build into that model the idea that the only way that they're going to get the treatment that they need is to return to another, and hopefully yours, if we choose you, program again. That's become less and less feasible for people, but that's actually something that I'm happy about, to be honest. I don't want to see my clients only live and thrive inside the confines of walls. You know, I want to experience life.
Of course. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, or this sort of occurs to me as you're talking, is this idea of sort of a fluid treatment model. This, you know, I think for a lot of people, especially, I mean, just sort of speaking from my own experience, you know, as I've toyed with the idea of doing therapy and things like that. I come from 20 plus years of working remotely, and I myself have been a victim of a lot of these things, the depressions, the anxieties, the things like that come along with it. You know, I've done a little like therapy here and there and stuff like that. But one of the things that kind of keeps me out of it is actually the same thing that keeps me from going to the gym with regularity. It's this idea that now all of a sudden I've got to make serious time out of my day to make this happen. I already don't feel like I have enough time in my work day to get all my work done, but now somehow I have to whittle out, you know, 2 or 3 more hours to either see the therapist or go to spin class. You know, for me, it's kind of that. And so I think for a lot of people, just, I don't know, I don't want to call it laziness, but just out of prioritization, we have a really hard time prioritizing that. And so many of us have trouble prioritizing ourselves and our self-care anyway, that I think we've got many battles on many fronts, you know?
I think self-care ultimately, you know, even for myself, just speaking as an entrepreneur and as an employer, self-care is going to come last in a lot of ways. When you have other people to take care of, it's kind of like doctor, heal thyself. You know, you have to take some of your own advice a lot of the time. That's really specifically why Live Treatment was created, and why more programs like this, I think, are going to continue to evolve, especially with this push toward treatment being something is seen as based on the individual and the need of the individual, and not something that is based on some predestined, preset program. I just don't think that's the future anymore. I don't think it's the future anymore to say you go in, and whether you're the type of person that needs, you know, art therapy and yoga and neurofeedback and EMDR and all these other therapies that I could throw at you, you may not be that guy. And why aren't we paying attention to who our client is? And why aren't we talking about, you know, now more than ever, people need to feel as though treatment, just like you equate it to working out or a gym, right? Because I sign up to go to a gym doesn't mean that I want a predestined workout, that no matter what I choose or how my body is hurting or what's going on, someone is going to be telling me 7 days a week, I need to be doing this, that, or the other thing. We need to be listening to our clients, and we need to be listening to them as individual people. One of the things I'm really proud of about our program in particular, but we're not the only ones that exist, is really that treatment plans are laid out with input from our clients. So it's, what do you need? What do you need? And let's evaluate this on an ongoing basis. What's working? What's not? What's helping you? Where do you really find benefit? Do we need to cut a little bit, more of this out? Do we need to add in a little more of that? And that's something really that can only be done when we're working, on a one-to-one basis. It's not a group model. And I'm really excited about kind of the direction in which things are going, because the group model really doesn't attend to a lot of those individual needs that people have, but either don't share in a group model, or the group model just isn't appropriate to deal with those individual issues.
Well, I think that's really smart too. And I think that for so many, part of being able to, I guess, find success in therapy is being able to build a trusting enough relationship that you are willing to open up. And, maybe you love your group and the people in your group get along really well, but, maybe there's just like a level of deep dark that you don't feel like sharing in front of a crowd, And so I think it is great to have that kind of opportunity. And I love what you're saying too about this two-way street kind of model where we're, listening to input from our clients, rather than just sort of this top-down approach to this is how we try and treat your problem. Because I think that for so many, and sort of like what I was trying to say with the gym metaphor was this idea that, I think when you have to go all the time, or when you think that you're signing up for a lifetime of therapy, it's, I don't know, it's a big commitment. It's hard for people to jump on and do. Where if they knew that they could just kind of dip in when they need you, dip out when they don't, and be able to sort of address their, I guess, mental well-being in sort of a fluid way that matches what's going on in their life or in their reality. I think that might open the door for more people to sort of just, I'm having a rough week, I need to talk to somebody. And then, next week I'm doing great, so I'm good to go.
Yeah, I think it's a commitment more that's made to the self, which we talked about is the most difficult, right? It's easier, I think, to commit to something where it's preset for you and you just kind of show up to show up. That's not really the client I'm interested in working with. It's a living, breathing process, and I don't expect 1 week to be the same as the next. If someone wants to sign up with us, we expect to be part of the journey. And the journey can look very different from week to week, day to day, whatever the issues may be. But what we pride ourselves in is actually having the individual be part of their own treatment team and letting us know, this is really what I'm going through right now. This is really what I feel like I need more of right now. And, I think a lot of times, in the field in which I've worked, which is, like I explained to you before, dual diagnosis, more psychiatric, certainly trauma-based. I'm a trauma specialist by training, eating disorders, substance abuse. We can have an approach that's very much the doctor knows best. And that can be very devaluing to a person. Mm-hmm. And since I am a trauma specialist, you kind of find yourself at this crossroads of surrender, quote unquote, which is something that's used often in programs, right? I need you to surrender to the program. Okay, if you're one of 40 or one of 20, we need you to surrender because you being the outlier is a real problem. We can't have you having access to X, Y, and Z while the same person you share a room with has none of those same privileges. It can create a plethora of problems, which I can't even begin to, elaborate on right now. But when we're working with you as a person, all of these things pertain only to you. And so when it's about what's working or what's not, what needs to be tweaked or what you need more of, it's really, you are part of the team. And to me, that's about relationship. That's about relationship. And I think if there's anything I pride myself most on as a clinician, it's not just recognizing the need of getting out of the office and into the real world where problems exist that cannot be defined in a 50-minute session, where you can't even begin to imagine what someone's actually dealing with at home, because by the time that 15-minute hour is over, we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But to really have that open dialogue of, we're going to be part of, to the extent that you'll allow us to be, what's going on. And not as your, many of our, clients are people who, our goal, and it's been very successful, is that no one would have any idea. If you and I, Ryan, were out to lunch right now, and I were the director of your program, no one would have any idea if you were sitting down to lunch with me or with a friend. Yeah. Whether that was happening, of course, remotely, as it may be right now. But if we were even in person, there would be absolutely no way that anybody would know that. There would be no, we're very discreet about things, and it's so that we can be really a part of life as it evolves. Sure. It feels like you're working with real authentic people. Because that's ultimately how I believe human connection works. Yes, I'm a doctor, but I'm also a human being.
Yeah, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I like to be first with being a human being. Yeah.
Well, so you bring up relationships, and I want to spend a good chunk of our time together talking about that, but I wanted to just make one more comment about self-care and see if maybe you had some sort of actionable insight that people could do. Sure. So I think, not to toot our own horns, but I think we're right that we don't often take care of ourselves first. Yeah. I think that it's interesting about our culture, because it's one of the things that's beautiful about sort of our culture here in the States, but it's also, kind of to our own detriment, is this idea, especially as employers or managers, that it's our job to take care of others. And we, generally speaking, don't take care of ourselves first. Do you have any sorts of insights, or, if you were working with somebody who had a real problem with this, where they've maybe gone too far to the point that maybe it's negatively affecting their own life in how they are, so putting their personal needs, on the back burner to accommodate those they work for or work with? Do you have any thoughts about how one might sort of develop the skills needed to start becoming a little bit more self-empathetic?
Yeah, I'll be very transparent with you. That was me. Not that long ago, honestly, I really had to sit down with some serious introspection and say, God, I'm doing what I love. I'm working with people who I'm inspired by. I am, I'm an entrepreneur. I take the clients I want to work with, that I feel are motivated. I don't work with those or refer those out that are not appropriate fits. Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? And what I realized is I wasn't applying the same treatment goals or the same principles to any client that I would take under my wing as I would to myself. And a lot of times as healers in this world, we talk a lot about the wounded healer in our world, the recovery warrior, and that doesn't mean, as I've spoken to my clients about many times, walking into the same situation over and over again to say, oh, I'm strong enough to handle it this time. It's actually about knowing better to know the difference and protecting yourself from situations like that. And it can feel so good to be of service. It can feel so good to be taking care of those who you feel really need you, but you forget that you need you, that you actually have to be able to give it. And what I actually did for myself was write down a treatment plan as I would for a client. And I said, what would Ronaye need? What does Ronaye need more of? How does she spend her day? And one of the things I actually did was buy one of those old-fashioned, it's going to date me here, but really, I'm just one of these people who needed to see it, especially in the age of everything being technological and my phones, multiple, going off at separate times with different ding reminders. I actually bought myself a day calendar, kind of like the one I had when I was in college, where hour by hour planned my day. And I wrote it. I wrote it out. Like what did I have planned in a day? And what I actually recommend to any client of mine where you see these kind of overlaps, where you don't have time to breathe, much less take a jog or a stretch or a cup of coffee or whatever else you might, you might be needing at that time. And so in actually planning out my day that way, I saw for myself, wow, no wonder you're feeling depleted. You're not taking your own advice. And so looking at this and planning my life out in the same way, and it was very, very challenging. Because I always tell my clients too, anytime you say a goal out in the universe, like I am going to lose weight, this is the time, that'll be the time where you'll get all of the commercials coming through on television or all of the apps coming through for, discounts on whatever food there might be that's coming, whatever the case may be. We tend to get challenged almost immediately when we make a goal overt. My goal was I was going to practice the same self-care that I was recommending to my clients that I practice, because I believe it is so very important authentically to practice what we preach. And during a time where I felt very needed, especially during a time where I felt, more people were in crisis than not, I didn't realize that actually could throw me, someone with decades of experience doing their own interpersonal work, leading teams of people. I'm a human being too. Yeah. And I realized when I felt totally depleted, wow, how many times have I actually stretched? Yeah. How many times have I actually been outdoors and seen what that looks like outside of my home office? How many times, so it really kind of gave me the time and the space to say, to write out my own treatment plan and to say Ronaye is going to have X number of hours in her day where she attends to self-care. And I'll tell you, that is the greatest challenge, because the minute you write that down, that's where you have, appointments that want to fill that exact space, people who need you at that exact time. And you want to be able to be flexible with that, because it's a flexible world, but you also don't want to give it up completely. In the same way as I would tell a client that self-care, if it takes up a certain gap in your day, if you have the hours of 3 to 4, let's say, filled in for you, that's an appointment. That's an appointment that you keep.
No, well, and I think that's so important, right? That idea of keeping the appointment with yourself. Yes. Because it is pretty easy to blow yourself off. Again, back to this idea of being a little bit paternal and trying to take care of those around us. Absolutely. For whatever reason, my booking with myself is less valuable than my booking with you, for example. Right. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, because it does, I think on its face, feel a little bit selfish. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of us kind of steer away from that, because our whole lives we've been told, oh, don't be selfish, blah, right. Blah, blah. But ultimately it's okay. Now maybe it's got to be done just like everything in life with a little balance. You don't have to be all you all the time. Maybe there can be some room for flexibility in there, like you said. But I think that, that it's critical to do that. A couple comments. One thing I wanted to say is that I wonder too how much of this, and just as a general exploration, and maybe you can tell me from your experience, some of this feels a little bit generational. I just turned 40, and so I've got different sensibilities than like my grandfather's generation and stuff like that. But I still come from kind of a boys don't cry world, from a work hard, grit, all this kind of stuff, right? Kind of kill yourself for the cause kind of thing. Yeah. And I don't know for sure. As a although I think I'm technically on the cusp of millennial, I'm not millennial, or at least I don't behave in the way that we stereotype millennials. And so, so I wonder though, but in the life that they're growing up in, if the sensibilities have shifted a little bit. And so I wonder if it's a little easier to be, I guess, open to self-care as a young person, because maybe it's more cultural, just like we're seeing an increase in the availability of mental health assistance in work and places like that, as stigma is starting to, come down, and walls are starting to come down, barriers are going away. I wonder for these younger people, next generation down, maybe they, are a little better at this self-care thing than the older people are. I
wish that were true.
Oh, well, good.
I really wish that were true. I can only speak as, a natural citizen of America. I grew up here. I certainly have a multicultural background. But growing up here in the United States, it's whether we attribute it to, looking out for one another from a community basis, and that's kind of like the way that we were raised, or whether we look at it more as like the American dream, like, are you kidding me? You're going to walk away from a paying appointment to go and take a walk? What the heck is the matter with you? And the latter, I think, is more of what I deal with when I'm consulting with more of my clientele who are, interested in more of that, provider mentality, like you're talking about, like growing up as a male in your generation. It's like, are you really, you're gonna go stretch right now? Do you know there's a potential call that's coming in that could make you X number of dollars, and you're going to go stretch right now, or walk, or call a friend, or whatever the case may be. What we actually know, though, and it's actually come up from, in research, and I don't have the research to quote you right now, but I promise you I can come up with it, is the idea that those individuals that actually do take the time to nurture that side of themselves, or those multi-sides of themselves, they are more productive. It's actually true. They're more productive when they take that call they need to take, that, or that call equals X number of dollars. They will do better on that call than if they would when they were burnt out and doing it with one eye open and kind of like, oh my God, I'm on my last leg, Mm-hmm. With our millennials, I think I might fall under the cusp of that. I'm not sure. I'm kind of pushing it.
I hear the definition move all over the place, so I use it when it suits me, but that's better.
Someone told me recently that I am one, and I had a real problem with that. And I think it's because, honestly, of the way in which we see millennials, right? We see, that terminology kind of comes with this, hand in the device, not really paying attention to the world around them kind of idea. I don't know if it's the sensitivity of the work that I do or the authenticity with the way that I do it, but my clients actually tend to be very, very worried about the world around them and about the impact they have on the world around them, whether they're musicians or artists or people who just feel the need to do something in a situation where they feel like so much is happening in which they feel powerless. Mm-hmm. And it's equally as important to remind them that while they have these, while they may have the muscles and the brain energy to go on for days and days, whether it's, impacted by Red Bull and caffeine or not, they also need to take care of themselves. And it's not really something that comes naturally. We don't really realize at a younger age that we can burn out, or even that we're giving from a place that we don't have to give from. Like, I'm in recovery, let's just say I'm 21, I'm in recovery myself. My friend calls me, she's really in despair. She's really going through a traumatic experience. And rather than, understanding what my resources really were to give, I will take that quote unquote project on completely by myself, and then wonder why it was such a blunder, and I think they really just don't know. A lot of clients of any age just don't know what to do when they're trying to be of service, when they're trying to prioritize another individual. But when they really, I hate the word shouldn't because it makes it sound shaming, but there's a role for everyone, and getting someone to the right professional and, getting their needs met, and then backing away a little bit so that they can make those decisions on their own, are sometimes some of the most impactful things that we can do. Taking it on ourselves, whatever our age may be. I tend to watch a lot of my younger clients want to play therapist, want to play recovery center, want to play life coach. And it feels good in the moment that it's working, and that person hangs up the phone going, "Oh my God, Brian, I'm so happy I talked to you. Everything makes so much sense now." And then they call back 2 days later and their life is a wreck. And my client's going, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do. I gave all my best advice." Like, but that's not, those are our limitations. And there's only so much that we can or should be doing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things you sort of touched on, and just to sort of maybe wrap up the self-care component that we've been talking about, is, one of the big problems for remote workers, and it sounds like, for humans in general, is this idea of boundary setting. And trying to establish, healthy boundaries for ourselves, for others, maybe setting expectations as it pertains to the work we're doing or for whom we're working. I wonder if you talk a little bit about trying to set healthy boundaries so that we can sort of make sure that, we're not getting too tight and closing out the people that matter, and we're still maintaining relationships with people who are close to us, and trying to, I guess, walk that tightrope, see if we can figure out how to walk that line. Do you have any advice on boundary setting?
Yeah. So from the kind of taking it from the top down, if you will, from the employer standpoint, we have to realize that we're people too, that we're humans, and that in order to show up and really be the leaders that we want to be in our managerial positions, that also does mean holding ourselves accountable to our own self-care. And just like every human is unique, I'm not going to ask every manager, every person in a higher up position to go do yoga or to go stretch or to go and meditate, but finding out what your thing is and making sure that you are giving back to yourself so that you can give to others. I think recognizing the fact that managers aren't machines, that employers aren't superhuman. We want to be there for everyone else. We want to carry everyone on our shoulders. And in many senses, we do. And in that way, we have to recognize our own humanity. We have to recognize that we must be giving back to ourselves, and that may not look like what our friend Karen is doing. Our friend Karen may be doing all kinds of breath exercises and meditation. We just look at them, we're like, that is not for me. Okay, great. Maybe for you, it's picking up your electric guitar half an hour a day and jamming out. Maybe for you, it's, whatever you do to unwind. But it is actually important to the work that you do as an employer that you do that. And then from the top down perspective, kind of coming down to those that, we supervise, that we guide, that we hopefully guide, like I just mentioned prior, by example, to the best that we can. It's having ideas to offer, like the idea that, when we do work in a non-remote setting, there's a time when we check in and check out of work. There may be a time card we punch. There may be something that signals our work day is done and our going home process has begun. And when we're working from home, there isn't something quite as tangible to signal that for us. Maybe it's having literally a practice of a shutdown, like a 10-minute kind of, I'm closing down work. This is the end of my workday, and I am now going to be part of my home life. Easier said than done, I know, but necessary nonetheless. It could be, to the extent possible, having whatever ritual that one develops. And again, this is very person specific, what that home office space looks like, what a ritual might be. I'm big on tradition and ritual because it cognitively defines, it really kind of sets a neural pathway differentiation between I'm at work versus I'm at home.
Yeah.
And, those kinds of things are very important because it signals to the brain, which, the brain stem controls the rest of our body, this idea of we just feel our body exhale. Mm-hmm. And it should feel different to come off the clock than to be on the clock. And it's not saying that even being on the clock has to be a difficult feeling. It doesn't mean it needs to be tense. It just needs to mean, it just means that we are on. And I think everyone that really wants to be a part of their job productively is quote unquote on when they're on. Yeah. And what does off look like to you? And so for employers, as well as employees, for managerial staff, as well as those that they are managing, from a top-down process, there really kind of needs to be that idea of what does shutting down look like to you? And if it hasn't been established as part of a company practice, like let's say you have a company practice where your phone is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Certainly I know in the treatment world, there are staff members that have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week calls coming in. And one of the ways in which to control that I've consulted on is having a rolling call system, where if the first person doesn't answer, then the second person does, or the third person does. So no call goes unrecognized, but that no one person feels like they are consistently and constantly responsible for the productivity of their company. And certainly if they're calling for help, right? In any of our jobs, we don't ever want to be the person to say, oh my God, I let a call slip. And especially in today's times, how could I have let that happen? Having those fallback plans where we are really acting as a team and making sure that that's an understanding that we want to actually be there to support one another, that just as, Suzanne might need 5 minutes to herself, so might Jason, so might Sherry, so might Josh. It's really important that we have this community where we come together and we understand that when everything is kind of on our shoulders, how do we share and disperse the responsibility to allow for a certain amount of self-care? If we don't create it, it won't exist.
Yeah, no, well, and I love the idea of sort of putting some of that on the company culture. I'm a big believer in sort of our own self-reliance and, to the extent that we need to be responsible for some of how we feel. And it's not always our employer's job 100% to make sure that we're mentally right. I like their support and I like them being involved in that decision. But I think that at the same time, we need to be accountable to ourselves. And but I love the idea of sort of company culture stepping in. And one example of this, or one way I've seen people do that or deal with this, as it pertains to this, steady flow of communication, and maybe it's not as critical for your run-of-the-mill tech company as it is for, a therapist to be available. Mm-hmm. But I've heard of people establishing guidelines around communication, for example. So if you receive an email, you have 24 hours to respond. If you get a, text message or a Slack, you've got an hour. If you've got get an SMS, I need it in 10 minutes. And if I get a phone call, I need you to answer the phone. Right. But by setting this cadence up, it allows you to sort of check out, right? Like we don't send emails after 6 p.m. So just get back to me by tomorrow, but if it's urgent and I need you, I can still get you, but hopefully those are few and far between, not daily emergencies.
That's right.
But I do love that idea of sort of building it into the company culture.
Exactly.
So moving forward, I wanted to talk a little bit about, one of the things obviously that happens in remote work, I talk about this to a great extent and people are probably tired of hearing about it, but I sort of think that, for me, even though remote work is sort of built on the back of great technology and connectivity and all these great things that we have nowadays, so much of our remote work success is based on the relationships we form with other people, that kind
Absolutely.
of thing. I think it's really easy, especially in sort of these post-COVID times. You've got sort of two classes of people, let's say, for sake of argument. You've got your group of people who were either working remotely prior or at least had interest in working remote. Most of them will do a little bit of research. They'll build up some skills so they could get a job, that kind of thing. They'll do a little reading. They will see or recognize that some of the pitfalls common to remote work are things like, isolation and feeling, some depressed feelings or whatever. Right. And, so I guess they somewhat fortify themselves for that, right? They recognize, okay, this could be a potential outcome of me working by myself all the time.
Right.
Now, during COVID, we've got this whole new class of people who, maybe they were interested in remote work, but maybe they weren't. Maybe they really liked their home, their, office. They liked going in and seeing everybody. They like having a place to go. And so now all of a sudden they've been thrust into a world that maybe they don't even care to be a part of. And, I'm not sure that they're totally prepared for it, and maybe they are. different strokes for different folks, right? Everybody kind of comes in their own way. So I'm sure some people are coping better than others, but what I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like the people who aren't actually looking to work remote, you know, I mean, if you're looking at remote work as a choice, not just the way of the future.
Right.
I think these people are running into situations where they weren't prepared for the, you know, negative things that come along with being isolated and working alone. And
Right.
so, and one of the things I think that, you know, is really common is this idea that because we're working apart, we're somehow not connected.
Right.
And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this idea of being, you know, that being distant doesn't necessarily mean disconnected. Exactly. And, you know, talking about that, not just in the frame of, you know, how can we, you know, I don't know, send people more emails or something and stay connected that way, but how do we maintain human relationships during these times where we're sort of forced to be apart?
Absolutely. I love this question. Yeah, we definitely have a group of people who, you know, we play to our strengths, right? And there are certain individuals who, for better or for worse, chose to work remotely because they felt that they had that strength basis. They knew who they were. They knew what their activities looked like outside of work. They felt fortified in them. Whatever the case may be, working remotely seemed like an appropriate fit. And then we have other individuals who were thrown into this or who had jobs where they got to know their coworkers quite well. And whether that was over coffee breaks and deciding how their last night's date went, or, you know, how many people have actually met their friends, or even, you know, a step further, you know, dearest friends from working together, you know, in the same place. You know, oh, we go way back. We started working at this company when it was a startup, and, you know, all this, and they're the people at each other's wedding. You know, there's a lot to be said for people connecting in the workplace and how much you get to know one another as individuals in all those moments that are spent not discussing work, you know, kind of like around the cooler or the coffee break or the smoke break or the happy hour after work, you know. And so what does that look like for the individual who expected that going in or had that going in, and now it has disappeared? Connection has nothing to do with, that's not true. Connection can have much to do with physical proximity, but it does not have to. It takes creativity and ingenuity. It takes understanding your corporate culture. It takes understanding that relationship the way you would understand the relationship with any other individual with whom you were trying to bond. So if we could for a second look at relationships, you know, work relationships as familial relationships or friendships or whatever. If I all of a sudden had a friend who moved away and they're now in New York and I'm in California, what is my part in taking responsibility from my side of that relationship and knowing and establishing kind of the ground rules, right, together with him or her about, hey, okay, so you're moving away. I now realize that this is happening. How do we prepare for not losing something that is important to us? If there's one thing I know about humanity in general, it's that we do not want to feel invisible. We don't want to feel as though if we didn't show up to work or we didn't show up to whatever our usual activity was, that nobody would notice. Nobody would care if Ryan didn't show up that day, you know. And so as a, you know, when we're talking about the work environment, the same applies. What do those relationships look like? So for some companies I've consulted for, they know their company culture very well. And they'll say, you know, we have a local, you know, coffee clutch that we want to, you know, a local coffee shop that we really want to support. And we are going to send coffee to X number of coworkers on this day, and they're going to Zoom with each other. And without their, you know, supervisors or anything else, they're just going to, you know, shoot the stuff. They're going to talk about how they're doing. They're going to talk about their lives. They're going to catch up, and it seems like what a waste of time to do this during work hours. But if you realize that this is actually what they were doing within their workplace normally, then you realize that what you're really doing is giving them back what helped normalize, not only normalize, but what made that workday that much more productive. That time to breathe out, talking to the people who they would talk to around having a cup of coffee, and then get back to work. And so the more we can kind of tap into our company culture, the more we can reevaluate and understand. And I look at things like this. I look at, beyond just COVID or anything that's happening right now that kind of forces us to think next step. This is where things were going anyway. We were trending in this direction. So if we look at that, and then we look at the importance of human connection, we realize that connection in relationship to productivity is everything. If you don't feel connected to the company you work for, if you don't feel that the company that you work for is connected to you, once again, kind of going back to that statement, if I didn't show up, no one would notice. How are you making sure that the people who work for you, the people who you want to remain loyal to you and giving their best to you and really feeling like, the loyalty to keep putting in from, for your goals as a company, which are then their goals as a company, how do you keep that feeling like a team? How do you keep them feeling like we're all working toward the same goal? It's not, hey, you employee, we're watching, make sure you're doing the right, make sure you're doing all that work that we think you're doing from home. It's, hey, you employee, we see you. We value you. We understand that this feels different. Our company culture used to include, honoring someone's birthday. Our company culture used to include honoring someone's 1-year anniversary. Our company culture used to include X, Y, and Z. And yeah, there's town hall meetings and all those things to assess productivity. That's a whole separate issue. The issue of keeping connected as human beings, ultimately a workplace, wherever it is, right? I could be working for, a Fortune 500 company right now. My workplace may be my home office, but my actual workplace is that Fortune 500 company. So how do I feel part of that Fortune 500 company working remotely?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I think, there's a ton of things we could unpack in there, obviously, but one of the things that I think, and it's kind of interesting to me how it's sort of been a recurring theme throughout this conversation, even as we jump topic to topic to topic, is this idea of, sort of setting intentions. So first of all, understanding what it is we want out of things. I think, and maybe this is just my perception, but it seems like there's sort of a, cultural attitude or sort of a global attitude that things should sort of come to us a little bit, that we should maybe, we have some kind of magnetism and things should come to us instead of us really having to go out and get them. Yeah. And so as it pertains to keeping up relationships and things like that with your coworkers who are also, working from home or who have been furloughed or whatever, everybody, of course, we all have our own problems individually. Yeah. But I think that by being intentional about wanting to maintain these relationships and trying to keep them together, and maybe it goes back a little bit to my comment about this idea, how much is the employer's duty versus how much is our own, right? And right. The employer can facilitate some of this. Like you mentioned, the idea of these Zoom coffee breaks, and I've seen things like that. They'll do, they'll send a little swag bag to everybody and do not open until this certain time, and then everyone opens it together on Zoom or whatever. And
sure.
I've seen things like that, right? So, that is a corporation trying to facilitate that through their culture. But on the other side of that too, these are your relationships. These are the relationships you have with your coworkers. And if they're important to you, you should want to keep them going. And so outside of work or inside, either way, however it's best facilitated, this idea of being intentional about maintaining these relationships. And the other theme that I think we've sort of run into is this idea of effort. Putting forth effort for these things, because one of the things that happens in remote work, just by its very nature, you typically have to work a little harder for some things. You have to over communicate. You have to, it takes a little longer to write your message out or send your IM than it does to just lean over the counter and talk to somebody. I mean, it's just different.
Or for those of us who are not, millennials, so to speak, who may be, older than you or I, how do you use Zoom? How do you use these, other ways that can all of a sudden you're asking me to connect? I got to use this new program. I have to learn all this new software. Exactly. I think you're absolutely right. The idea of intention behind things, yes, it's a top-down process in terms of employers inviting that, facilitating that to the degree that they're capable, but ultimately employees, staff, members of the team understanding that it is a revolving door. Mm-hmm. If you're feeling disconnected, you have a role in the disconnection.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's honestly, it's one of these things, and we talked about it just a little bit ago too, is this idea of sort of a two-way street when it comes to our treatment, for example.
Yes.
And so, as an employee or working in a company, yes, of course. I mean, if your company can facilitate things, that's great, but it takes two to tango, right? They can tell you that, hey, we should throw parties for everybody, but if you as employees don't get into it, then it's going to die on the vine. People just will lose interest. And so I think it's really important, this idea of intention. And I know that it's one of these phrases that gets kind of mixed up in sort of a hippy-dippy crowd where it starts feeling like, gets really yogi or gets really, meditatey or whatever, where we start talking about setting your intention and these kinds of things.
Sure.
But I think ultimately, and back to even all the way back to the beginning of this conversation with self-care and all this kind of stuff, being intentional about what it is we want, whether it's work-related or interpersonal or intrapersonal, whatever it is that we want. I mean, we actually do need to chase those things down a little bit. We can't just kind of stand around and wait for things to come.
Absolutely.
So, I guess the phrase would be do the work, right? We have to do the work.
It's funny you should mention, kind of falling full circle. One of the things I could not do as a director of a treatment center, because I did not work for myself and the money I was making was not my own. But I will fire clients lovingly and compassionately, just like you would at a job. I will say, this does not seem to be the right fit for you, because you're not wanting to put in the work and the effort that it takes to actually make your goals and your vision come to reality.
Well, and
it's true in this situation, we're going to meet you where you're at, but understanding that the level of effort you put in is reflective, really, ultimately, always of what you get out. Yeah. It really is. And that's a decision. We can say, well, we can blame it on a number of reasons. The gym was too far away. I couldn't walk to it. It was too smoggy outside. I couldn't go out, whatever the case may be. I have heard every excuse in the book for any person who did not want to put effort into something that was different or new or required more of them. But here's the reality, Ryan. The world is changing. It's not a matter of will it or is it going to. It has, and it is. So it's a matter of how willing are we to make our best life out of the new world in which we are currently living. Because it's never going to revert back to what it was before. This is here to stay. So,
and it's interesting too, because you hear these people talking about the new normal and the future of work and all these sorts of things, right? But I mean, ultimately, the new normal changes day to day. I mean, of course, it feels really dramatic right now with the influx of COVID and the pandemic and all these things, and then so many things going on socially, and there's a lot happening right now in our country. So it feels like it, was one way and now it's something else. But the reality is, it's always in flux and it's always moving around. And so the things that you can control, the things that you can control is being intentional about the things you're looking for. And then you just figure out how to navigate the seas. If you're trying to make your way from Europe to the States and you're coming across by ship, you may have this great idea that you're going to go in a nice straight line, but as soon as that first storm hits and you're blown off course, well, now you must adapt and you have to figure stuff out. The end is the same. You're looking forward to the same goal. So in the drawing a parallel between setting your intention, you want the same outcome in your position, or you want the same, feeling of happiness or whatever in your personal life, or whatever it is you're looking for. Ultimately the end result can be the same, but you can't be dissuaded by the bumps and the curves in the road.
This time that we're in right now, and like you said, we're always in flux, but this time especially where so many of us are in shock from that company culture, that job, that school environment. Even let's talk about millennials who are no longer, going to school actually on a campus, but instead are, doing it online. This is either going to be a time where we slip further and further away from ourselves, our intentions, our goals, where we slip further into things like depression, isolation, or anxiety, or this is going to be a time where we actually become our best selves in whatever capacity, whatever that means to us, in whatever capacity we choose to fulfill that. This is a time and a place that, for at least at this moment, as far as I can see it, that is the positive you draw from this. If there's one silver lining from all of this is, what do you want your future to look like? Because you've never had more of a glimpse into the future than you do right now. And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a really great thing. And you don't hear too many people talking about the opportunity of right now.
Right.
Because I think so many of us, like you mentioned, are still in shock or trying to figure out what's next, right? Or maybe our immediate need, we've been furloughed and now we have to find work, or,
Absolutely.
a lot of people are suffering right now. So I understand that it might be difficult to find that silver lining.
For sure.
I do think you're right that, this is also an opportunity. Like, when have you ever had so much time? I mean, if you're working from home, for example, and if the statistics are to be believed as it pertains to remote work, remote workers are supposedly notoriously more productive than their office-based counterparts,
Right.
Generally speaking, because they don't have the, the distractions of the water cooler and things like this, right? So they're able to be very productive. Mm-hmm. So as a result, you may be able to get your 8-hour day done in a lot less time now if you are really focused and intentional on your work, meaning you've opened up a number of hours in your day that you could spend on yourself, that you could spend working on self-improvement, or finding the new way, or looking for new opportunity, or whatever it is. And so I think that idea of setting intention and being mindful about what's going on, and understanding that we can't control the spread of COVID, but we can control how we react to it. Absolutely. And I think that is so much of what, will get people through this time, and allow people to not only, just sort of weather the storm, but also to thrive during it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, the things you can control. What part of this are you accountable for? And how can you make this time period count? There are certain things like this that are going to happen, whether we like them or not. And I'm not one of those believers that says everything happens for a reason. Whatever it is, whatever crap got thrown your way, it all happened for a reason. But I am one of those people who will tell you, how do you make it count? Because otherwise it happened, and it happened for no benefit whatsoever, other than to cause the pain it caused, and now it's gone. So how do you harness the meaning, and how do you grow better from it?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's probably a great way to sort of wrap this thing up. So Ronaye, can you tell us, where can people find out more about the work you're doing, both at Live and just sort of personally? How can folks get in touch if they have questions or if they'd like to talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So the Live website is livetreatmentvip.com. So that's Live exactly how it sounds, Live treatmentvip.com. There also is a phone number, and I'm a pretty human being. So most often there will be a call that will go, may go to voicemail, but it'll be me returning the call. 323-714-8113. Otherwise, you can reach me online at Dr. Calvert on Instagram or live_treatment. And
Great.
I look forward to hearing from each and every one of you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we'll make sure to put all those links and everything in the show notes so people can track you down easily and just kind of click away. But yeah, so thank you so much, Ronaye. This has been a really great conversation. It's really fun to get the perspectives of different people from different aspects of mental health, and people with different levels of expertise in different categories. And so I think we covered a lot of great ground, and I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you.
I'm so grateful for you, Ryan, all the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much to everybody who tuned in this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much.